All right, so first of all, I'll get the screws out of the way to remove this front cover. So both on the left and the right side, from the back side, you're gonna find these small Phillips screws that you gotta remove. Number one Phillips driver will take them out. They do have little washers on them. Get both those out. And then from the front, you're gonna have a single Torx screw. And this is, the older ones, it's gonna be Phillips. Does help if you remove the horn cover, but it is possible to get this cover off without removing the horn cover. And I have my finger in there. You can either magnetize the bit, put grease on the tip of the bit, but the one thing you do not want to have happen is lose a screw into, it will fall right into the cavity of the frame if you're not captivating the screw when you're removing it. All right, so next, just want to carefully pull the cover away. So you can see it's loose from the top. Get your fingers in there and you pull these edges out, and we'll just release the plastic tabs that hold it in place. There's going to be a single connector, and you want to pull this little tab, and that will release the connector from the LED headlight assembly. So now you can see both the front brake master cylinder and the left side, which is your rear brake master cylinder. All right, these brake systems aren't linked, so we're going to start with the front. Go ahead and clean the master cylinder off with a clean rag, you know, the top of it. This is a cover here. I'd also check the brake pads on there. One thing about flushing the brakes, if you have worn out brake pads and you fill this right up to the maximum mark, when it comes time to put new brake pads in, there may not be enough volume in this master cylinder when you push the pistons back in to install the brake pads. So it's kind of a fine balance. If you had brand new brakes in the front, you could fill this up to the maximum capacity. But if they're worn out, you do not want to fill this to the maximum capacity. So go ahead and remove the two screws. These screws are replaceable. If you do get in a bind, you have those available, nice stainless steel replacements. I usually take my Phillips driver and get it in between the mirror perch and then just lift the cap away, and very, very carefully. I'm keeping the handlebars as level as I can. It's on the center stand right now. And typically if I had a power bleeder right now, I would suck all the fluid out of there. You can take, if it was very dark fluid, this is it's just a little bit yellow. It's 2-year-old fluid or a little bit more than that. This scooter was manufactured sometime in late 2019. It's 2021 now. You can pull this out with a syringe if you like, you know, just so you only have fresh fluid going through. But this is fairly clean, so we're just going to flush this all the way through. Be careful not to knock the scooter. Typically, you just want to have lots of clean rags handy. You know, put them right there, so in case you do bump the scooter, it's going to drip on the rags and not on your paint. Because if that brake fluid sits there on the paint, it will eventually eat the finish of your paint. So the setup I got here is just a basic hose and a combination wrench where I can easily open and close the brake bleeder. So you have a hose that will freely flush the brake fluid through, and obviously you pull the lever, hold some pressure on the lever, open it up, and then close the brake port and let go of the lever. The whole time you want to be monitoring your brake reservoir and make sure you never allow it to run dry. So we'll do that several times. You can get probably 5 or 6 pumps out of this before you end up with a brake reservoir that needs to be topped off. And just depending on how dirty the brake fluid is, you may want to flush about half of this bottle through if it's really dirty. If it's not very dirty, you'd probably only need to flush about a quarter or 1/8 of this bottle through the front brake system. The rear brake system, you probably want to flush a little bit more because it is a longer brake line to the rear brake system. All right, so I'll do this several more times. Pull pressure on the brake lever, open up the port, close the port, let go of the brake lever. Go ahead and pull your hose off the bleeder very carefully and allow that to drain into your bottle. And go ahead and snug the bleeder port and put the rubber cap back over it. So I pretty much have flushed, you know, probably about 2 containers or 2 reservoirs worth of fluid through the system. The lever is very, very tight. That's important. If you had any air in the system, you're gonna have a lot of fun continuing to bleed the brakes, especially when the ABS system. If you get too much air in the system, you may need to have it professionally bled with factory dealer tools that put the ABS pump in a special mode. So keep that in mind. You do not want to make a mistake and allow air in the system if you can help it. So right now the fluid reservoir is about 1/3 full. You can see it at the very bottom of the window. I just want to bring it right to the top of the window, maybe about just under 2/3 full. And that's about as full as I want to take it, considering the brake pads are about 50% remaining on them. So now that we have it at the correct level, go ahead and put the reservoir cover back on. And we'll go ahead and put the 2 screws in. It's not all that important to have these very tight. I was very careful the whole entire time not to bump the handlebars. And you may get a little bit of residue coming out of the edges. You use a rag to wipe the outside of your brake master cylinder. So one more thing you may want to do while you're doing service to the brake fluid is lubricate the pivots. These get pretty dry and you end up with like kind of extra friction in the levers and it will feel kind of crunchy. And I'd recommend some type of spray lubricant. This is a very sticky lubricant, kind of difficult to get, but there's, you know, spray grease, white lithium grease would work just as well. It's a little messier. And just give it a small little spray down where the lever pivot is and right where the heel, which is where the lever pivot, it pushes onto the piston that's in the brake master cylinder. So get that in there and it will feel like $1,000,000. You know, it gives you a much smoother brake feel when you have those parts all lubricated. All right, so we're gonna move to the rear brake. Cleaned off the top of the reservoir. Go ahead and get the master cylinder cap off. Pop the lid. And you can see these are stuck on there, and a lot of times I'll lever that off, and I made a little oopsie and leaked a little bit, so you definitely want to wipe that up immediately. That's the problem. If you move the handlebars around, it will oftentimes spill the fluid. Go ahead and just carefully wipe all around any residue that's dripped off. I'm going to wipe that up. And now we're going to move to the rear brake caliper, which is located on the left rear side of the engine. All right, so we're at the rear brake caliper. It's pretty difficult to access because it is within the wheel. Obviously, if you took the wheel off, it'd be even easier to do this. It'd be perfect time for doing a tire change in conjunction with the rear brake flush, but I want to show how to do it with everything here in place. So as you can see, they added this little tab. This is found on the newer scooters. It makes it very difficult to do a brake flush. On the older brake calipers, they did not have this tab in a way. We're gonna, just like the front, we'll go ahead and remove that rubber cap. And it removes and separates. You wanna have just a 1/4 inch drive, 10mm socket on there. You're gonna need to break this free because it's oftentimes pretty tight. Just break it free. 2 ways you can go about this. You could put your finger on it because you can't really get a combination wrench such as this on there with everything in the way. So it's really difficult to do it that way, but you could use your fingers to open and close the valve. Alternatively, Motion Pro makes a fancy little tool. Not so useful on the front, but the 10mm brake bleed tool is pretty useful for the rear. And the Scooter West part number on this is tool-brake-bleed 10-10. And you can find that on the Scooter West web store. So the way this works is it snaps on top of the bleeder right here. Kind of got to get it indexed to the hex. And it's got an integrated rubber valve in there. So you just go ahead and open it a little bit. And at this point, I kind of want to monitor it, keep some pressure on it. I don't want it coming apart. I put the rag under it because you do have a little seepage from the thing, but just go ahead and pull the lever, and it does have a one-way valve, and you'll see the fluid going right through the hose there. So very simple to use, and just watch the brake fluid reservoir. We're just going to pump it through. I'm going to top off the brake fluid master cylinder reservoir up from the top before it runs dry. So with this device, I no longer need to open and close the valve because it's got a check valve built into that Motion Pro brake bleeder mechanism. And it makes it very easy to bleed the rear brakes on a Vespa GTS. And at this point, I got pretty much 1.5 reservoirs worth of fluid through the system. And now we're just flushing it with very clean fluid at this point. And at this point, I would say I've completed the bleed. So I'll pump a little bit more through. And I want to verify I have good pressure. We're going to go ahead and close the valve, which you could do with this Motion Pro tool. And I'll do the final torquing with that little socket there. We'll give the lever one more pull, make sure it's tight. It's very, very tight right now. And pull the tool off. Make sure that bleeder is snug. Go ahead and put the reservoir cap back on and the rubber cap onto your caliper. And that's pretty much have both the front and the rear successfully bled. All right, last little bit of grease in there. And now our brakes are feeling like $1,000,000. Brake pads, of course, you want to inspect those. Best time to bleed your brakes is when you have brand new fresh brake pads in there. Then you don't have to worry about your reservoir overfilling when you change out your brake pads. So just always keep that in mind. Well, thanks for watching. I hope I truly showed you the easiest way you could flush the brakes on your Vespa GTS or any Vespa with hydraulic brakes. There's power tools that do it a little quicker. They're expensive and cumbersome to use sometimes. But just with that one basic tool and some other basic hand tools, a bottle and a hose, you can go a long ways with doing all the maintenance you ever can need, on your Vespa. And that's one thing a lot of people overlook is the brake system. It works great, and they're just concerned once it stops working. So not something you want to allow ever to stop working. You always want to keep it in tip-top shape in the interest of safety there. So thanks for watching. This is Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. You can watch my prior video on how to flush the coolant, which is also recommended every 2 years. Or you can search the Vespa Motorsport YouTube channel for over 700 other videos I've done over the last 11 years, all about servicing, repairing, both modern and vintage Vespas, accessories that we have available at ScooterWest.com, and much, much more. Thanks for watching. Till next time.